Okay. Hi, everybody. So, again, I've already introduced myself to you guys. I'm Dr. Root, and what I was going to do was give you more of an interactive sort of lecture um, here today than just sort of the notes that I've posted online about the importance of being earnest. And the main reason I wanted to do that is because I think, at least, it, I'm an English teacher by trade, but one of the things I think is important. Pardon me, I just ate. One of the things I think is important is um, an understanding of the historical context that occurs when a literary work is produced. Okay, so Oscar Wilde is born in 1854. He dies in 1900. Okay, so um, essentially, for those of you who either don't know much about history or don't know much about English history, that's fine. That's why you're here. You're here to learn something. Um, Queen Victoria reigned over England from 1837 to 1901. Okay, now, yes, you heard that right. 1837 to 1901. Okay, in America, for the most part, we're familiar with the idea of like a term limit. Okay, what that means is, especially now, two terms is a limit. Okay, that's 8 years. And if you don't like a president, you go, wow, 8 years I'm going to have to sit through. Well, multiply that by eight, and then you get an idea of how long Queen Victoria reigned over England. Okay. Queen Victoria's reign was earmarked by a number of things. One of them was England was just really starting to come out of a industrial revolution. England's industrial revolution, um, if we wanted to make a nice round number for it, was probably about 1750 to 1850. Okay. Um, Typically, things in England tended to happen sooner than they did in other countries. Like in America, our industrial revolution probably happened 100 years later than it did in England. Because, again, it's hard for us to understand this because we've always lived in a world, myself included, even being twice your age, where the United States is sort of like the world's powerhouse. Okay. The only time that really wasn't the case was probably in the 80s. Again, when before you guys were around, when Russia and the U.S. were sort of going back and forth, there were sort of two world powerhouses, and of course Russia collapsed. Um, so it kind of left us. Now I guess a lot of people might say it's the U.S. and China, but of course with all this craziness that's going on now, which is why we're communicating this way. Um, who knows what's going to happen, where and when and how, but that's beside the point. Where I'm going with this is, okay, so what comes along with industrialization typically is an increase in population. Usually, at least what we like to think of, is an increase in jobs. Um, Usually, there's what we call like an urban blight. What that means is, uh, for example, a city like London is going to become overpopulated. It's going to become really kind of ugly. There's going to be more people there than really the facilities are meant to handle. Um, if you read 18th century British works, the century prior to Victoria, you'll read about, um, and of course they didn't use this terminology for it, but basically, the streets in London had doo doo running down the sides of the gullies on the sides of the road, because you have to remember they didn't have toilets and plumbing and stuff like we do today. Okay, again, these are concepts that the reason I'm laying these down for you is these are things that are hard for us to understand today. We don't deal with them. So, um, you've got Oscar Wilde being born in 1854. So he's born just about 20 years into Victoria's reign. Okay. One of the things that Victoria's reign was also really earmarked by was um, what the British people probably termed the stiff upper lip. The stiff upper lip basically is sort of, being very proper, prim, upright, maybe even uptight, um, placing a high value on how you appear to people. In particular, at this time, people appearing like they were aristocrats. When you watch, for example, like a lot of films about, and I don't mean like history films. What I mean are just like maybe even adaptations of books or films that depict England centuries ago. You see the women in the long flowing gowns. You see them wearing the hats. Maybe kind of like what you would see at like the Kentucky Derby, though probably the women there probably wear less, but they wear the hats and things like that to be very showy. Gloves, things like this. That's what Victorian England would have looked a lot like for people who were of a higher status. Um, One of the other things that is important also to note about Victoria's reign, and this is where I'll try to kind of segue the history into Wilde's play. Victoria was really the last Queen of England that had any political power. Um, England still has a queen. Yes, that's true. Uh, but the queen really doesn't have any political clout. The reason that the queens and like you all know about, well, I'm not gonna say you all know about it, but like Prince Henry is so well known. He doesn't have any real power within England. He just has a title. He's a prince because he's a descendant of a royal family. He doesn't have any political power there. Okay, what I'm getting at is he's very wealthy and he's very well known. But as far as being like a powerful entity within England, he really isn't. He's more like a celebrity. Okay, well, that's how the Queen is now. The Queen is more like a celebrity. Okay, well, Queen Victoria, yes, she would have been very well known. Obviously, she was the Queen, but she was one of the last, probably the last monarch in England that had any real political clout. Um, by 1897, shortly before Wilde died, and near the end of Victoria's reign, 1/4 of the globe was controlled by England. Okay, to give you an idea of how much land England had, how much they had colonized. 1/4, 25%. That's a lot of the globe. Okay, and there was a saying that went along with Victoria's reign. It was, you like my quotes here, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And if you hear that quote and you go out, what does that mean? Well, what it means is the English possessed so much land that when the sun was setting in one place that they owned, it was going up in another place. Okay, literally. Um, and don't think also of England as being like the lone bad country of colonizers or of slave traders or of people that participated in things like that. Other countries did too. It's just that England was probably the one that did the most of it because again they were at one point in time the most powerful country in the world. I know that's hard for us to look at because now they're really I don't want to say they're not a major player, but they're certainly not what they were then. Okay, now how does this segue into Wilde's work? Okay, so if we wanted to look at Oscar Wilde's life, some interesting facts about him are that he was born into an affluent family. His father was a doctor, and his father actually was charitable. He didn't just perform. I don't recall if he was. I want to say he was a surgeon, but what I'm getting at is he didn't just practice medicine for money. he actually was philanthropic. He helped people. He did a lot of good from what all counts. Wilde's mother I know less about, but probably again, and you have to remember this. I don't know what Dr. Singh taught you guys. I don't know how he teaches. He wasn't here very long. I barely know the guy. I barely knew him. So I don't know what he covers with you guys and how he teaches. Pardon me. All I can tell you is that when I try to bring in the historical context, it's in a way so that you better understand what the works are doing. Well, one of the things about Wilde's background that is relatable to something you've already read or you should have read is Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie. Okay, well, Tennessee Williams, a lot of his works were very autobiographical. Autobiographical, all that means, for those of you guys that don't know, is written about himself. Well, if Dr. Singh told you, it gave you any background information about Tennessee Williams, and I don't know that he did, and if he didn't, that's fine. I mean, everybody teaches differently. But Tennessee Williams had a sister, and she was mentally ill. She had a lot of problems. And so the idea in The Glass Menagerie that, of course, now her name is escaping me, Laura Wingfield, there's a prevailing idea, and it's pretty well widely accepted by most literary critics that I've read, that Laura Wingfield is actually representative of Tennessee Williams' sister, and that Tom is sort of Tennessee Williams. Okay, well, the reason I'm bringing that up is Oscar Wilde also had a sister who, in his case, she died very young. She died at like 15. From what I remember, I don't remember if it was like a tuberculosis. It was something caused by a very high fever. And again, what you have to remember is like this coronavirus right now is killing people in a number of ways. From what I understand, typically the way it's killing people is through like respiratory issues, like people are getting fluid in their lungs. But that doesn't mean there aren't probably people out there maybe who are dying of high fevers, okay, where their body can't fight off the fever. What you have to remember, though, is that there are a lot of people out there who have the coronavirus, believe it or not. They're going to survive, okay? I mean, and honestly, not to go too far off the track, but all of us have probably actually had coronavirus at one point in our life, okay? We probably have. It just wasn't the strain of it that's around now that's really violent. And what I'm getting at is we have medicines and treatments now where there are people who have it. They're going to have it for a couple of weeks and they're going to be fine. And they didn't have those treatments then. That's my point. Was you got a high fever and you either, sort of hope that bed rest would help it, or maybe you ate your chicken soup. There wasn't a whole lot you could do when you got the kind of disease that could kill you. There just wasn't a whole lot you could do about it. So Wilde's sister dies young, and she was 5 years, I believe, 5 years older than him. So that would mean he would have been like 10. You can imagine that's pretty devastating. We all know that psychologically speaking, things that happen to people at a young age that are very traumatic carry through their life. Now, they manifest themselves in a lot of different ways. I'm not going to sit here and play Dr. Freud. Do you all know who Sigmund Freud is? I don't know whether or not Wilde's sister's death had anything to do with the person he became or the life he led. I imagine it probably contributed to it in some way. But for me to sit here and tell you that Oscar Wilde's life choices were a result of his sister's death would be, for me to be woefully One, unqualified to say that, and two, I would probably be stretching the reality of things. And one thing I always try to do is tell my students, I don't know everything about everything. I don't. I'm a teacher. That doesn't make me an expert on every single thing about what I'm teaching. If any of you have a question about something, if any of you have a concern, if any of you just have a curiosity, especially if any of you are English majors or minors or thinking about becoming one, here's the whole thing about me. I'm very easy to get a hold of. Send me an email and ask me a question. I will do my best to find the answer for you. I'm not saying that, one, I'm definitely not telling you I will know the answer. I'm not even going to tell you I'll be able to find it, but chances are I'll know where to go to find it. And I will do my best to find it. Okay. So again, like, I'm owning up to you. There are plenty of things the Dr. Root doesn't know. If you're curious about something, just ask me. Okay, that's my job. My job is to be here to try to inform you and educate you and make you better at this. You guys wouldn't be in this class if you already knew this stuff. Okay, so moving on. Wilde was what we call an aesthete. Okay, an esthetician is probably the more technical term for it. And basically what that means is that's somebody that finds beauty in it's someone who looks for beauty in things. Again, one of the things that it's hard for people to understand, but it's true. Up until a certain era, and I would say it was probably maybe during Wilde's life, maybe a little while before it. So my guess would probably be, probably during the Victorian era. And again, you have to remember, movements of any kind are a response almost always to the world in which people are living. Give a quick example. I mean, why do you think Black Lives Matter became such an important movement? Well, it became an important movement because it was a response to a society that was mistreating people and disenfranchising people who didn't have a voice. And so the way to have a voice was to form a group. Okay. Well, you have to think, if what your queen's philosophy is, or the philosophy of the country is to appear prim, proper, upright, decent, upstanding, morally strong, then the way to go against that is to be, sort of scandalous, lascivious, scandalous, whatever words we want to use. I mean, we still use them. Trifling, ratchet, whatever words you want to use. That would be the response to combat society. And again, I'm not going to tell you like you should do those things, but what I mean is, I think in Oscar Wilde's eyes, the way to respond to a society that he felt constrained him was to do things that most people would think of as being inappropriate. So let me go back to the idea of living in a world where being an esthetician was not always something that people would have understood or would have agreed with. For a very long time, art was viewed as being something that should be moral. What that means is art was supposed to be something, and guys, I'm going to have to end this stream for a second because I'm getting a phone call. So I will pick up in a minute. Hello?
Hey, is this Mr. Root?
This is him.
Hey, Mr. Root, it's Mitch giving you a call back.
Okay. So what's up with what's up with this truck that I've heard nothing about for like 10 days?
I'm sorry, man. So we got everything diagnosed on it. Everything's checking out good. It looks like the battery
That's what they didn't register battery, and of course they didn't register battery, so they bought. Okay, guys, so